A millionaire throws newborn twins into the ocean. 22 years later, his phone rings, and what he hears makes his blood run cold. The rain was relentless that night, beating against the sleek surface of the luxury yacht like nature itself was protesting what was about to happen. Grayson Vanderhust, a cold-faced millionaire with salt and pepper hair and sharp gray eyes, stood at the edge of the vessel's deck, staring down into the black Atlantic waters. In his arms, two newborn babies, wrapped tightly in navy blue blankets, slept unknowingly in the arms of a man about to discard them like a business failure. His hands trembled slightly, not from remorse, but from fear of what this scandal would do to his name. The twins were born just hours ago in a small private clinic, the result of an affair he never meant to let spiral this far. Their mother, Lainey, a 25-year-old waitress from Savannah with soft brown skin and kind eyes, had died giving birth. No witnesses. No family. Just her and the babies, and now just him. "I didn't ask for this," he muttered under his breath, pacing. "I built an empire. I have a wife, a board, investors. This would ruin everything." One of the babies stirred, letting out a small whimper that sounded more like a plea than a cry. Grayson's jaw clenched. He could have paid someone to disappear with them. He could have left them at a church, or even, God forbid, a hospital. But that would leave loose ends, whispers, rumors. This would be clean. The boat rocked gently as a wave passed under them. In the distance, a low foghorn echoed. He stepped closer to the edge of the yacht, holding the infants as if weighing the decision one last time. His breath came out ragged in the cold air. "I'm sorry," he whispered, more to himself than to them. "But I can't let you destroy me." And then, with one swift motion, he let go. The babies dropped into the dark water with two soft splashes. No screams. Just silence and the haunting sound of the sea swallowing what it was given. Grayson stood there, staring into the black waves for a long moment. Then he turned, straightened his coat, and walked back into the cabin without looking back. He didn't notice the dim orange light of a small fishing boat anchored just beyond the fog. He didn't see the silhouette of an old man standing on the deck, binoculars in hand, eyes wide with disbelief. Because someone had seen everything. And the ocean wasn't done with Grayson Vanderhust. Not yet. The sky began to pale with the first hints of dawn as the old fishing boat drifted silently through the mist. Captain Rowan Leaf, a weathered man in his early 60s with sun-leathered skin and a long silver beard, kept his eyes fixed on the choppy surface of the water. He had barely slept. What he'd witnessed hours earlier still sat like an anchor in his chest, the sight of a man tossing two helpless newborns into the sea. He hadn't moved then, frozen in shock. But as soon as the yacht turned and disappeared into the fog, he'd started his boat and scanned the waves with frantic eyes. And now, as the light grew, he saw it, something small floating ahead. His hands gripped the throttle as he sped toward it, heart pounding. Please, God, let me be in time. The first bundle came into view. A blanket, soaked and heavy, bobbing on the current. He reached over the side, hauled it in. The baby was motionless, blue-lipped, cold. "No," he choked, his fingers trembling as he fumbled to check for a pulse. Then, a twitch. A soft gasp. Faint, but real. He wrapped the infant tighter against his chest and scanned again. "Where's the other one?" he murmured, eyes darting across the surface. Then he spotted her, a few yards away, her blanket snagged on a clump of seaweed. He steered the boat gently over, pulled her aboard. She was colder than the first, her skin pale as paper, but as he pressed her tiny body to his chest, a weak, shuddering cry escaped her lips. Tears welled in Rowan's eyes. He hadn't cried since his wife died 20 years ago. But now, holding these fragile souls who should have drowned in the night, something in him broke open. He took them below deck, started the small heater, and wrapped them in every dry towel he could find. Then he fed them warm sugar water from a dropper, prayed over them, sang lullabies he hadn't whispered in decades. He didn't call the police. He didn't go back to shore. Rowan Leaf knew the world too well. If he turned these children over, they'd become a headline, a scandal, or worse, vanish into the system and never be heard from again. Whoever had thrown them into the water had money, power, and something to hide. Instead, Rowan named the boy Cullen and the girl Zadie, after characters from his late wife's favorite book. He carved their names into the wooden beams above their cribs. He swore no harm would ever come to them again. And so, on a forgotten patch of Georgia's coastline, hidden by marsh, tide, and time, the twins began a new life. Raised not in luxury, but in safety. Not in a mansion, but in a cabin filled with stories, music, and the steady strength of a man who had once lost everything, and now found something worth saving. The sea had tried to take them. But Rowan had taken them back. Years passed like waves rolling in and out, carving quiet memories into the shores of Rowan Leaf's isolated world. Cullen and Zadie grew beneath the rustling canopies of moss-covered oaks, their laughter echoing through salt-thick air as they ran barefoot across the wooden planks of the dock, fished in the brackish waters, and learned to listen to the wind the way their guardian did, like it had secrets to tell. Rowan raised them as his own, though he never claimed to be their father. He told them stories of their arrival, always carefully crafted, that they were left in his care by someone who loved them but could not stay. He didn't lie, but he didn't reveal the truth either. Not until the time was right. By the age of 9, Cullen had become fiercely protective of his sister. He had the strength of a boy raised by the tides and storms, but the sensitivity of someone who had been surrounded by quiet love. He spent hours with Rowan in the small boathouse, learning to fix engines, gut fish, and mend sails, absorbing every word like scripture. Zadie was different. She was curious, ravenously so. Always asking questions, always seeking out the horizon. She collected shells and bones and sea glass, cataloging them in handmade journals and drawing the shapes of birds with startling accuracy. She once told Rowan that she didn't feel like she came from the ocean, but that the ocean had sent her here, like a message in a bottle. On their 15th birthday, Rowan took them to the old fire pit under the stars and gave them a wooden box. Inside were two objects, a gold bracelet with the engraved initials, GVH, and a folded letter, yellowed with age. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Zadie picked up the bracelet first, rubbing her thumb across the letters. "Whose is this?" she asked quietly. Rowan's voice was low and steady, but full of something heavy. "It was with you, the night you came. I kept it until I felt you were strong enough to know." Cullen opened the letter and read the first few lines. His hands began to shake. It was in Rowan's handwriting, but it detailed everything: the night on the boat, the man in the storm, the plunge into the ocean, the rescue. Everything. Zadie's eyes filled with tears. "He threw us away." Rowan reached out, his weathered hands rough but gentle. "You were never garbage. You were miracles. And I don't know why that man did what he did, but I know you were meant to survive." The silence that followed was long. The fire crackled, and above them, the stars blinked like eyes too far away to judge. After that night, something changed in both of them. Zadie became obsessed with learning more, not just about the man who abandoned them, but about where they came from. She devoured books on ocean currents, human survival, and criminal psychology. She built her dream of becoming an oceanographer not just from curiosity, but from a need to understand the very element that almost took her life. Cullen, on the other hand, internalized everything. He became more focused, more driven. He started talking about law, about justice, about how people in power too often got away with evil. Rowan watched the fire grow in his eyes and knew he would one day challenge the kind of man who had once stood at the edge of a yacht and made the cruelest decision a human could make. Then, at 18, Rowan fell ill. The doctors said it was late-stage pancreatic cancer, untreatable, and aggressive. He didn't fight it. He didn't want to. "I've done what I was meant to do," he told them, "and they're ready." In the final weeks, Cullen never left his bedside. Zadie would sit in the corner, sketching quietly, tears falling onto her notebook pages. Before he died, Rowan called them close and whispered, "You were given a second chance. Make it count. Find the truth, but don't let it poison your hearts. Forgiveness sometimes frees the forgiver more than the forgiven." He passed away the next morning, as the sun rose over the marshlands. 2 weeks later, Zadie boarded a bus to New York City, accepted into a marine science program on scholarship. Cullen left for Atlanta, determined to study law and work his way into the justice system. They promised each other that someday, when the time was right, they'd find the man behind the initials GVH. They didn't know his name. But they knew what he had done. And they weren't finished with him. The years that followed were filled with motion, trains, buses, campuses, late-night coffee, and an ache that neither of them ever truly spoke about, but both carried like a shadow behind their ambition. Zadie flourished at the Oceanographic Institute in New York. Her professors quickly recognized her brilliance, not just her academic performance, but her intuition. She could read tide charts like sheet music and predict currents with an instinct even seasoned researchers admired. But beneath her success was a gnawing need. The ocean had tried to kill her, and she needed to understand why. She wasn't afraid of it, she respected it. The ocean had been both executioner and deliverer, and that paradox defined her. Late one night, after a field lab session in the harbor, she lingered at the docks, staring at the massive luxury yachts moored there, their hulls glowing under LED lights. One boat, in particular, caught her attention. Not because it was more beautiful, in fact, it was old, weather-worn, out of place among the polished giants. The name etched on the stern sent a chill crawling up her spine. Margaret. She didn't know why it unsettled her at first. Then she remembered, she had once scribbled that name in a notebook Rowan kept, something he muttered in his sleep while sick. The Margaret, night fog, crying babies. At the time, she thought it was just fever talk. But now, seeing the boat with her own eyes, something inside her clicked. The next morning, she returned. It took her hours and a little clever manipulation of harbor logs to find out the owner, Vanderhust Shipping Company. The name hit her like a thunderclap. Vanderhust. GVH. She dug deeper. The company's CEO, Grayson Vanderhust. A man in his 60s. Headquartered in Charleston, South Carolina. That night, her hands trembled as she called Cullen. He answered from a courthouse corridor, exhausted but alert. "I found him," she whispered. Cullen stopped walking. "Who?" "The man who left us. Our father." There was a pause on the line. Then Cullen's voice, hard and level, "Grayson Vanderhust. You know the name?" He nodded slowly. "Zadie. I've been investigating his company for months. Financial irregularities, possible fraud. I didn't connect the initials until now. Everything snapped into place like a cruel puzzle. Their rescuer had written the initials GVH in that letter all those years ago. They had grown up with it carved in the back of their minds. And now, both of them, on completely separate paths, had found their way back to the man who had tried to erase them. Zadie couldn't sleep that night. She lay awake in her dorm room, staring at the bracelet she now wore every day. The gold had dulled over time, but the engraving remained sharp, like a wound that never closed. Cullen called again the next day. "I'm heading to Charleston next week. There's a formal hearing into Vanderhust Shipping's records. If he shows up in person, I'll see him." Zadie was silent. Then she said, "I'm coming too." And so, for the first time in years, the twins prepared to reunite, not just with each other, but with the past. With the man who had decided their lives weren't worth living. They didn't know what they'd say. They didn't know if they were ready. But they were going. And this time, they would not be thrown away. Charleston was warm when they arrived, the kind of humid southern warmth that clings to your skin like memory. Zadie stepped off the bus first, her backpack slung over one shoulder, her other hand clutching a worn leather notebook filled with sketches, names, timelines, and theories. Cullen was waiting for her outside the courthouse in a navy suit that looked borrowed and slightly too tight in the shoulders. But he stood tall, jaw set, eyes hard. They didn't embrace at first. Instead, they looked at each other for a long moment, two survivors who had gone through different storms, but were cut from the same sky. "You're taller," Zadie said softly. "You're braver," Cullen replied. Only then did they hug, and it was the kind of hug that stitched years of silence back together. They spent the next few hours going over everything. Cullen had been building a case for months. An anonymous whistleblower had tipped off authorities about falsified shipping manifests, labor violations, and off-the-books deals tied to Vanderhust Shipping Company. Cullen hadn't known the full scope until now. Zadie filled in the personal pieces, the boat, the bracelet, the strange reaction she'd had when she saw Margaret, the name that had lived in Rowan's delirious whispers. "I think he kept the boat," she said. "As a trophy. Or maybe a reminder." Cullen nodded. Or maybe he didn't believe anyone would ever come back to recognize it. The next morning was the hearing. Zadie sat in the back of the chamber, dressed simply in a white blouse and dark jeans, trying to steady her breath. Cullen stood before a panel of auditors and legal observers, presenting his findings. And then, near the back door, the man walked in. Grayson Vanderhust. Age-worn but still regal, silver hair swept back, walking stick in hand like a king surveying his court. He wore an expensive gray suit and an expression of mild boredom, until his eyes landed on Zadie. Something flickered across his face. A memory? A chill? Guilt? She held his gaze, refusing to look away. And for a moment, the courtroom disappeared. She could see the deck of the yacht again, feel the salt in her lungs. His hands releasing her to the ocean. Her first breath of cold, cruel life. He turned away first. Cullen continued his presentation, but his voice was heavier now. He wasn't just talking about documents and fraud, he was standing 10 feet away from the man who had once decided he wasn't worthy of a future. During recess, Zadie stood outside near a marble pillar, arms crossed, when she heard slow footsteps behind her. "You look familiar," a low voice said. She turned. Grayson studied her, eyes narrowing. "Have we met before?" Zadie said nothing. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out the bracelet, the one he had left with her that night, the one he probably forgot existed. She held it out to him, palm open. His face drained of color. "I was one of the babies," she said coldly. "The ones you threw into the sea." He staggered backward, as if struck. "You," he rasped. "That's not possible." "It is," she said. "I have a brother too. He's inside right now. The one building the case that's going to bring your empire down." Grayson looked like he might collapse. His hand trembled on his cane. "I thought you were dead," he whispered, eyes wide. "I thought the current would." "But we weren't," she snapped. "We lived. We grew up. We found each other. And now we found you." The silence between them was deafening. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you do it?" Grayson didn't answer. Maybe he couldn't. Zadie's eyes narrowed. "You don't get to pretend this never happened. Not anymore." She walked away, leaving him standing there like a ghost stranded in daylight. Her legs were shaking. Her heart pounded like a war drum. Inside the courthouse, Cullen saw her return. Her eyes met his. "It's him," she said quietly. "There's no doubt." Cullen nodded. "Then it's time we finish this." Neither of them knew what justice would look like yet, legal, personal, or poetic, but the man who had once thrown them into the abyss now stood face to face with what rose out of it. And they weren't going to disappear quietly. That evening, the city of Charleston was quiet, the courthouse emptied, and the golden hour light painted long shadows across the cobblestone streets. But inside a modest hotel room just 2 blocks from the marina, Cullen and Zadie sat at a small table, both staring at a single phone resting between them. Neither spoke. The weight of what had just happened that day still hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Grayson Vanderhust had seen them. Had recognized them. Had crumbled before their presence like a man suddenly haunted by ghosts he thought were long buried. But there was more they needed to do. Zadie wasn't done. She couldn't be. With trembling fingers, she picked up the hotel phone and dialed a private number she had found in the files Cullen accessed during his investigation, the personal, unlisted number registered to Grayson's home in Isle of Palms. It rang once. Then again. And again. Just as she was about to hang up, there was a click. A raspy voice answered. Vanderhust, the man said cautiously. Zadie said nothing for a beat. Then, with chilling clarity, she spoke the words she'd waited her entire life to say. Do you remember the night you stood on your yacht and dropped 2 infants into the Atlantic Ocean? Silence. A long, stifling silence. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Who is this? We're alive, Zadie continued. We survived. And we know exactly who you are. Grayson didn't speak. Not right away. Cullen leaned in, watching Zadie, watching the pain in her hands as they gripped the phone tighter. We found the boat, she said. The Margaret. You kept it. Just like we knew you would. And we found the bracelet. GVH. You left it on me that night, maybe by accident. Or maybe because deep down, some part of you hoped we'd live. Did you? His voice came finally, barely audible. I don't know what I hoped. Cullen took the phone then. His voice was calm, even, but brimming with restrained fury. You made a decision 22 years ago, and now it's time you face what it cost. You threw us away. But we didn't drown. We became everything you feared. Grayson's voice broke. I thought, it was the only way. Lainey was dead. My wife would have left me. The board would have ruined me. I panicked. I was a coward. Zadie snatched the phone back. Cowards hide. You didn't just panic. You chose. You looked at 2 innocent lives and decided they weren't worth the inconvenience of existing. And now you're going to hear from us, every damn word we've carried since the day you threw us away. There was a pause. Then, a quiet plea. Please, can I meet you? Both of you. Face to face. I need to say what I never could. Zadie almost laughed, a bitter sound. You don't get to ask anything. But Cullen placed a hand on her arm. His eyes weren't full of hate, they were full of something else. Something heavier. Something final. We'll meet, he said into the receiver. Tomorrow. You'll be there. And you'll listen. They agreed on a time and a place, the marina, near the dock where Margaret still sat. Cullen hung up, his hand still hovering over the phone. Zadie's voice was low. Why are we giving him that? Because, Cullen said, it's not just about him anymore. It's about us finally choosing who we are. We're not orphans. We're not forgotten. We're not victims. He stood, eyes fierce. We're the reckoning. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying with it the salt of the ocean, the same ocean that had nearly become their grave. But tomorrow, it would become their witness. The next morning dawned overcast, the sky a slate of thick gray clouds pressing low over Charleston's harbor. A quiet wind moved through the marina, rattling the riggings of boats and carrying the sharp scent of brine through the air. It felt like the world was holding its breath. Zadie and Cullen stood side by side on the weathered dock, just a few steps from the boat named Margaret. She looked smaller than Zadie remembered. The ghost of that night had made her seem enormous in her mind, a monstrous thing. But in the light of day, the yacht looked old, faded, tired. Like the man they were about to meet. Grayson Vanderhust arrived precisely on time. He was wearing a dark wool coat over a cashmere sweater and slacks, his silver hair combed neatly back, but his gait was slower, heavier. He walked with a cane now, the confident predator they remembered from pictures replaced by a man who looked, finally, haunted. He stopped a few feet from them, eyes fixed on the ground. "I didn't think you'd come," he said quietly. Zadie's voice cut through the damp air. "We're not here for you. We're here for us." He looked up. His eyes met theirs, eyes they had inherited, though neither of them would ever admit it aloud. The resemblance was undeniable. And in that moment, he seemed to see it too. Something inside him wilted. "I came to say," he swallowed hard. "I'm sorry. I know it's not enough. I know there are no words for what I did. But I say it anyway. I'm sorry." Zadie stepped forward. "You left us to die. I know. You murdered our mother, not with your hands, but with what you did after," she continued, her voice rising. "You erased her. And us. Like we were stains on your perfect life." Grayson winced. "I loved Lainey. In my own, broken way. But when she died, I was terrified. My whole world was built on lies, and the truth would have destroyed it. I chose myself." "You chose cowardice," Cullen said, stepping beside his sister. "And it cost you 2 children who could have loved you. Who could have forgiven you. But instead, we had to survive without knowing who we were. And when we found out, all we found was a monster in a suit." Grayson's lip trembled. For a moment, it looked like he might collapse again. But he held his ground. "I've had 22 years to live with what I did," he said, his voice thin. "And in those years, I watched my fortune grow while my soul shrank. My marriage ended. My friends turned to dust. And I was left with nothing but silence. I earned every second of it." Zadie shook her head. "Do you know what saved us? A man named Rowan Leaf. A poor fisherman who saw what you did and chose to do the opposite. He raised us. He gave us everything you wouldn't. And he did it without ever asking for a thing in return." Cullen added, "We didn't need your money. We needed decency. Humanity. But we got that from a stranger." Grayson blinked back tears. "Then maybe I can still do something. If not for myself, then for his name. For your lives." He reached into his coat and pulled out a file folder. Inside were legal documents, papers transferring ownership of the Margaret, his last property of sentimental value, into a trust. Along with a letter to his board of directors, resigning from the company and requesting that half his fortune be diverted to a fund for at-risk children and abandoned infants, in Rowan Leaf's name. Zadie stared at it, stunned. "I know this won't make up for what I did," he said softly, holding the papers out. "But if you allow me this, maybe something good can grow from something evil." Cullen didn't move. But Zadie stepped forward, took the folder, and looked him in the eyes. "This isn't forgiveness. This is accountability." Grayson nodded. "That's more than I deserve." He turned to leave, but paused. "If you ever decide you want to know more about Lainey, I kept something. A box of photos. Letters. I couldn't destroy them. They're yours now." And then he walked away, cane tapping gently against the dock, the sound fading with every step. Zadie stood silent for a long time. The ocean lapped quietly against the pier. Cullen put a hand on her shoulder. "That wasn't closure," she said. "No," he agreed. "But it was something." They watched the old man vanish into the morning fog. And for the first time, the ghost of that night on the ocean felt a little further away. 2 months passed since the morning on the dock, and the sky above Charleston had shifted from gray to spring blue. The city bloomed around them, azaleas along the streets, warm breezes sweeping across the harbor, but for Cullen and Zadie, it wasn't just the season that had changed. Something deeper had shifted. A weight had been lifted, not entirely removed, but finally shared between two hearts that had once floated alone in the dark. Grayson Vanderhust never contacted them again after that meeting. True to his word, he resigned from his position, signed over a large portion of his fortune, and quietly disappeared from public view. News broke weeks later that the Vanderhust Foundation was launching a major initiative supporting abandoned children, foster care programs, and single mothers in crisis. It was named not after Grayson, but after Lainey LeClaire and Rowan Leaf. Zadie received a box in the mail just days after the story aired. No return address, but she knew who it was from the moment she saw the handwriting. Inside, she found photos of her mother, Lainey. Some were candid, laughing in a diner, her arms greasy from working a shift. Others were more intimate, holding a guitar, writing something in a notebook, her eyes distant and thoughtful. There were letters too, some never sent, some half-written, all filled with affection, doubt, and hope. One was addressed to "my babies," and though it was unfinished, the last line read, "If you ever read this, it means somehow, miraculously, you lived. And if you lived, you will love. And that is all I could ever ask for." Zadie read that line every night for a week, pressing the letter to her chest like a heartbeat she had longed to hear. Meanwhile, Cullen returned to Atlanta, but not to bury himself in law. He switched tracks, choosing advocacy over litigation. He began working with youth programs, focusing on kids aging out of the foster system. Ones like him. Like the boy he could have become if Rowan hadn't found them. In April, they met again in Savannah, standing before a newly built community center bearing a bronze plaque at its entrance. The Leaf Center, in honor of the man who chose to save what the world discarded. Zadie touched the plaque with her fingers, tears welling in her eyes. He'd laugh at this. Say we overdid it. Cullen smiled. He'd grumble and say he was just a fisherman. But he was more than that, Zadie whispered. He was our father. As people gathered behind them for the ribbon-cutting ceremony, a little boy with big eyes and ragged sneakers walked up and looked at the plaque. Who was he? The boy asked. Cullen knelt beside him. He was the kind of man who, when everyone else turned away, stepped forward. Why? Because he believed every life mattered. Even the ones the world forgot. The boy nodded, his expression serious beyond his years. Later that night, Cullen and Zadie stood on a quiet beach near the marsh where Rowan had raised them. The moon cast silver across the water. Zadie scattered some of Rowan's ashes into the waves, her voice soft with memory. We made it, old man. We made it all the way. Cullen tossed the last handful, watching the particles disappear into the tide. Not because of who we came from, he said. But because of who raised us. As the tide rolled in and washed over their feet, they stood together, no longer orphans, no longer victims, no longer searching for identity in someone else's reflection. They had taken their pain and turned it into purpose. They had stared into the face of the man who abandoned them and walked away not as broken souls, but as whole, defiant, and unshakably alive. From the edge of death, they had built a new life. And this time, they would never be thrown away again. In my view, the ending of this story is not just a resolution, it's a reclamation of identity, dignity, and purpose. Cullen and Zadie began as victims of a cruel decision, shaped by abandonment and shadows they never chose. But through resilience, love, and the quiet heroism of one good man, they transformed their tragedy into something profoundly powerful. What makes this ending meaningful is that it doesn't rely on revenge or dramatic confrontation to achieve justice. Instead, it leans into the strength of forgiveness without excusing the past. It shows that healing isn't about forgetting, it's about choosing to build something better from what was broken. Grayson Vanderhust, once untouchable and cold, is not redeemed in the classic sense. He doesn't get absolution or affection, but he is made to face the consequences of his actions, and that's where real accountability begins. His legacy, ironically, ends up doing good, not because he deserved forgiveness, but because his children chose to rise above the darkness he left them in. This story is ultimately about legacy, not the kind built from money or power, but from love, sacrifice, and the courage to change the ending. Cullen and Zadie didn't just survive. They rewrote the narrative. And that, to me, is the most powerful kind of justice.